Welcome back to Space Coast Real Talk. I'm your host, Rachel, with Florida Lifestyle Realty, and today we have a special guest, Elise Johnson with FloriCasa. She is a vacation rental manager, and she specializes in everything you need to know in regards to renting out a property as a short-term rental. Elise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to share all the short-term rental info with you.
Let's start off with, how is the short-term rental market here in the Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral, the barrier islands of this area?
Our market is great, really. It's very stable. We have about a 70% occupancy rate among the beach towns if you look at it and average it out. So the majority of the year properties are rented, but that is very different from what you might find if you Google, is it a good idea to buy an Airbnb? Over the past couple of years, Airbnbs or short-term rentals went through a surge right after the pandemic. So many people were looking for alternatives to hotels. So they wanted to stay in houses, work remotely. So that really drove the rental numbers up. So when you look at data, if you just compare it, this year to a year or two ago, there will be some decline, especially in certain markets. Like the Austin market is taking a bit of a hit right now. But we're very lucky just with our area being such a destination to go to, and also just a lot of the growth that we're having in the area is really keeping our short-term rentals stable right now.
Okay, awesome. One thing that a lot of, when people reach out to me when they want a second home, they're pretty shocked by all the restrictions that we have in the area. There will be houses just a couple of neighborhoods apart, and one you can, one you can't. So can you tell us a little bit about restrictions, how that law in 2011, I believe it's 2011, we'll fact check in the description if I'm wrong, how that goes into play in the area? Are these restrictions a good thing or are they a bad thing?
Okay, so yes, there are a lot of restrictions, and for someone looking to buy in the area, they have to really be in the know of, what zoning their property has, what county, what city, to be sure they can rent. I am a glass half full kind of person. So I understand why the restrictions are there that the cities and counties put in place, and I respect them, and I think they actually are helping us right now for like Austin and other big cities. I don't mean to pick on Austin, but cities that had major growth and there were no restrictions put on rentals, like anybody could come in, buy a house, and at that point in time they were paying good money for properties and throwing some IKEA furniture in there and making it an Airbnb. And it was easy. It was easy money. People were booking them and they were getting great rates. But now as those markets are starting to dip, they're having trouble, which again is why you're hearing some reports that Airbnbs aren't doing so well. But in our market, the positive of having some of these restrictions is that our market is not oversaturated. So that's number one. We have a pretty level demand and supply of rentals. So if you're in the market to buy one, it might take you a little bit longer to find the perfect one, but once you do, it's going to be a great investment. Also, let's not even call them restrictions, let's call them requirements. It helps make sure that the people that are getting into running a vacation rental know what they're doing. They're having like the right safety requirements within the condo or the house to make sure their guests are safe. It's not someone just coming in, again, like we were saying, like throwing a IKEA furniture in there and calling it a rental. And I also think if you've ever been on like a Facebook group for a local community, there can be a lot of negativity around Airbnbs or vacation rentals. But because we do have some of the restrictions, we're not getting people who are just like jumping into it, not knowing what they're doing. So I think it can kind of eliminate some of those people so we don't always have the bad rep.
Right.
Because unfortunately, like with anything, you always hear people like to voice their complaints about things, but you don't really always hear people shouting from the rooftops about good things.
You're not going to hear someone on the Facebook group saying, "Hey, oh my gosh, I made $100K this year off my renting out my home."
Especially when you're going to get like all the comments afterwards that are negative about vacation rentals. So, of course, there are some things that in a perfect world would be different for vacation rental owners, but I don't mind what we have. I can work with it. Owners are successful.
I think there's a nice healthy balance with the restrictions, and we were talking about restrictions and also requirements. So in regards to restrictions, like for example, if you're watching this and you don't want to be next to Airbnb, a property being rented out on Airbnb, then go out, move to Satellite Beach, go move to Merritt Island. Now, is it possible that there is still a property that is on Airbnb? Yes, in those areas, but they're technically not allowed to be. As soon as the county or the city finds out about that, they will get a cease and desist letter, and they'll also be fined daily until they shut down their operations. So, if you're looking for something without that, then go to places like Merritt Island, Satellite Beach, India Atlantic, and so forth. And then if you're looking for the perfect place that you can buy as either just strictly investment or as your second home, supplement your expenses with by renting out, then go to Cocoa Beach, go to Cape Canaveral. There's a nice healthy balance for what you're looking for in the area.
Yeah, and I don't think there's really any neighborhoods around here that are so heavily Airbnb'd or vacation rental that, if you wanted to live there full time as yourself, I don't personally think it would be a major burden on you.
Yeah, like Cocoa Beach is still a good mix.
Yeah.
It's not strictly Airbnb.
And again, it's pretty rare that you get the things that you hear about on the news, like a raging party at the house next to you. That doesn't really happen that often. I think because some of the requirements that we have, like Cape Canaveral is a 7-day stay. We're not going to have the crew that's coming over from Orlando to have a raging party one night, because they're going to have to book 6 nights and be there for 7 days. We can kind of avoid those situations with those rules and requirements that are put in place.
Absolutely. Let's talk about where you think is the best area to buy beachside. Which city?
Oh gosh.
Like, I knowing you, working with you, I know you're gonna say every city has a different positive thing. If you're looking for more peace and quiet, Melbourne Beach, But as far as income?
So that means we're assuming that the owner isn't really planning on using it for themselves. So what they want and hope for in their own vacation home doesn't really matter, because there is a difference. If someone who's buying it, they're going to use it part-time for themselves and part-time to rent. I always say it's super important to consider like what you as the owner, what you want to be. Do you want to be in Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral, which is more tourist driven, more restaurants, there's more things to do, more activities, mini golf, zip lining. But if you're just looking to retreat, come to the beach, relax, then the South beaches are a little bit more geared to that. So Indian Harbor, Melbourne Beach especially is beautiful down there, but very quiet. I mean, it can take, depending on where you are, it's like a 10-minute drive just to get to a Publix, which is great if you're looking for that escape. So as for strictly investment purposes or income purposes, I tend to think Cocoa Beach, Cape Canaveral are more marketable just because the proximity to the airport. So it's a straight, easy drive to Orlando Airport, like 50 minutes. So you can also market to families that are going to Disney World and all of that. Sometimes they like to be able to go back and forth, spend time at the beach, but also do the resorts, what are they called? Theme parks at the same time. So all good options, but I think there's a little bit more marketability, Cape Canaveral, Cocoa Beach.
More high probability of being rented out at a higher percentage or higher occupancy rate is what I think, especially Cocoa Beach, because in a certain zone, which makes up most single family homes in Cocoa Beach, you can rent out nightly, whereas Cape Canaveral is 7-day minimum. So I agree. I think Cocoa Beach is probably the top number one. So one thing I get people calling all the time, and some are looking for that second home just to supplement their expenses. Others are looking for a very high yield of return. So is that possible here? Can you make an income off? Like a livable income off?
Yeah, okay, a livable income. So I will say this, you can absolutely find a property, cover your expenses, and then make money on top of that. So depending on your quality of life you're looking for, I guess it depends on if it's your sole income, but maybe like you're saying, it's someone who has multiple properties and all of their incomes combined make a perfect living for them. But it's very doable to rent a property and have it more structured as like an income generating business each month. If you have an HOA versus a property without an HOA, that makes a big difference right there in cost cost.
But at the end of the day, it's an appreciating asset.
Oh yeah.
So you have to really look at it is that you're buying a property that is so close to the beach, especially eventually when interest rates go down, whether that's next year or 5 years from now. When they do go down and you can refinance, the equity in your home is going to jump up, as we saw the past 2 years. When interest rates are low, prices go up. That's when you're really going to see big cash flow. So it's a long game. Now let's talk about the risks. Like, what are the risks of
owning a short-term vacation rental?
Yes.
Okay, so an obvious risk is, what if it's not renting? I think in 2020 we learned that there are no guarantees. Airbnb shut down short-term rentals and everyone thought the world was caving in. But then on the flip side, a few months later, when everyone could start traveling again and they were looking for ways to, not be on an airport, vacations that they could drive to, Airbnb, short-term rentals boomed. So there are no guarantees, but I will say there is a kind of a calculation that people use when buying short-term rentals, which is look at your cost and see if you could rent the property long-term and still cover your costs. And if that's the case, like you were saying before, then your risk is minimized because you're covering your expenses. And again, it's real estate. You're in a long-term game here.
right? Yeah.
So, but you're investing in, hundreds of thousands of dollars into a property. Of course, there's going to be some risk, but again, it's still a good investment. So.
Right. Okay. What about the fear of someone destroying your property?
Well, one, insurance.
Right.
You have homeowners insurance. But also make sure you have a great rental agreement. I personally have one that was drafted. It protects the property owners much more so than just like a standard agreement that a renter might sign through Airbnb. So that's number one. Number two is, I think a lot goes to how the property is presented. I'm very clear in my rental listings, like you're not having a party here. If people, just a family, let's say, if they check in, they see the property is cared for, they're going to naturally put a little bit more care into it. They're not going to be banging walls and doing things like that. So insurance, and I also have all guests have a damage waiver. So I cover $1,000 of any damage that might happen during a guest stay on behalf of the owners. So, accidents happen. I had a family in a vacation rental a couple of weeks ago, and they were so sweet. The mother sent me a text and she was like, I am so sorry, we broke 3 glasses. I was like, how do you break? And she gave me the story of exactly how everyone broke. But they were just glasses.
And they're glasses, yeah.
They're just glasses, it's no big deal. But accidents do happen. So I tell all my owners too, if it's a vacation home they use for themselves, if they have anything in there that has any kind of sentimental value or true value in there, get it out, because things will happen. Is your property going to get destroyed every week? No.
No, it's rare. It's a rare situation. Yeah. And so tell us about, what made you go into property management? Because it's not easy. It's not an easy job by any means, but why did you decide to go into vacation property management?
Okay, so I've worked in real estate here in the area, and I had so many clients who were buying that would say to me hey, can you recommend a property manager for short-term rentals? I would give them a list of options and say hey, call all these people, talk to them, you decide who you want to go with. Because I didn't really feel like there was one that I wanted to kind of put my name behind as a recommendation. I just felt like there were some opportunities missed at the time. So then I just started thinking about, what I might do differently. I also was noticing that there are more and more owners that have owned here for quite some time, years possibly, and the cost of ownership is starting to rise a little bit. And those owners really need a way to help cover their expenses. A lot of them are on fixed incomes, so they need to kind of look at alternatives. So maybe a property that was strictly their vacation home at one point in time, they're now thinking about renting. I'll meet with them, and if a property owner does not want their property rented every single week, I work with that.
Right.
There are some companies that it's got to be rented every week, which if I have an owner that wants to do that, we can do that. But I also recognize that these are people's homes. They want to enjoy them. They want to cover some costs. They're not looking to make $1 million on it. So I felt like I could help a lot of owners that way. And then the second part of that is, or maybe it's the third, I have a lot of travel experience. For 15 years prior to getting in real estate, I traveled the world for a luxury retailer. And during that time, I was very focused on the guest experience. And I also was staying in, on a weekly basis, hotels, rental properties, B&Bs. So kind of looking at my background of thinking about guest experience, being the guest, it was kind of like this perfect storm that merged together. So now I bring in all of those things when I'm working with property owners and with guests, kind of trying to figure out, how to make the best possible experience for everyone. It's not just one thing. There's a lot that goes into it. I'm also very hands-on. I'm like in and out of the properties all the time, as long as there's not a guest there. I remember one day I was like loading my car. I had all of these supplies with me and you were like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I was like, I'm setting up a property.
Yeah, all the Amazon boxes coming in. Like, oh, what came in today?
She was like, you really are hands-on. I was like, yes, like roll up the sleeves, you know?
Yeah.
But it is a job that you have to roll up your sleeves. I mean, there was this situation with a flood recently in a property and I was there like mucking up the water. So it's not glamorous by any means, but I love just the balance of, getting out there and being in the properties and working with all of the owners and the guests that come into town.
Yeah. Point off from flooding, that's not that common. Was it a pipe or was it weather?
No, it was, so the property we were in the process of setting it up. So it wasn't rented yet. We were still like getting through things, but it had an older hot water heater in it.
Yeah, I didn't want to scare anyone watching this. Like,
it was not a flood like from weather. It was a hot water tank that was past its age, and the owners were working on getting it replaced. We knew the time was up, but we were still in the setup, and it went. So I guess it was good timing. It could have been worse.
One thing I will say, when you started getting into this, and for coming from my background, owning an Airbnb up north, so when I moved down here, I was having trouble finding out, like, what are the rental restrictions? Like, is it a free-for-all? And I couldn't get a clear answer from anyone. When you started this up, you really researched it. We know exactly what is allowed in every single town, city, county, part, jurisdiction now. And I'm always amazed. I will have people call me and they'll say, I'm looking to buy. I already talked to a property manager and they told me to go buy in this area. I'm like, you can't buy a property there and rent it out short term. Like, end of story, you can't. It's a 90-day minimum. And I'll go and research this property manager and they have listings there. And granted, I think for a very long time things went under the radar and people pass, with renting out their property in an area that it is not allowed. However, there are the towns and cities have hired people to actively go after, like, look through the Airbnb listings and find where these properties are, and they'll put up a letter on your door and cease and desist, and they'll start fining you daily. I know owners that have been fined daily. And just recently we've had a few up in the market, and I can tell instantly when it was an Airbnb. Like, there's one in Merritt Island right now, and it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, it's staged so well. It was an Airbnb. You can't Airbnb a single family home in Merritt Island. I respect you for, you could take any listing. You could have someone call you up from Satellite Beach and be like, take my listing, and of course you will make money off that, but that's wrong. It's against rules of that area, and eventually that owner is going to be losing out on a lot of income. So it's super important for me too, as a real estate agent, to make it very clear to people buying, because you're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, like you've talked about so much, it's so important to know where you're buying. And as a realtor, you can work with people and kind of advise them. But I always say whoever's buying it, they really need to get involved with that and understand exactly where they are buying, what the ordinances are, make sure they talk to the city or county, because they can't just take someone's word. You kind of have to get it, understand exactly what the restrictions are, and hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, from the city. And yes, I'm pretty by the book. I'm not going to rent a property that can't be rented. I also invest a lot of time and money into a property during the setup process, so I don't want to set it up and then have
get
it
a letter
shut down,
a couple weeks later.
Yeah, so I always make sure and go through all of the licensing requirements for all of my clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, there you have it. That's all we've got for you today. If you have any additional questions or want to start the process of either looking for your first short-term rental in the area, or maybe you already own one and you're ready to get it listed on either Airbnb, Vrbo, or FloriCasa's website, make sure you give Elise a call. She'll be happy to sit down with you and go over all of that. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button, and make sure you reach out to us. This is Space Coast Real Talk. I'm Rachel Langley with Florida Lifestyle Realty, Elise Johnson with FloriCasa, and we'll see you on the next one.